real estate, by the way, wire fraud is going up 500% a year over year, the last 3 years.
On the show today, we're going to have Tom Cronkright, is a title professional, has been a title professional, and unfortunately his firm fell victim to a scheme, which then prompted him to develop a company that is supporting the industry from a prevention standpoint. So we're excited to have Tom on the show and kind of talk about his experience and what his company is doing to help prevent this.
So he is the founder and CEO, and the company is called?
It is Certifid.
And Tom is on the line, so we have two Toms. Hey, Tom Cronkright, welcome to the show.
Bill and Tom, thank you. Happy to be here, and couldn't agree more with the statements that were made the last few minutes.
Well, as Tom said, you have firsthand experience from being a title company at one point, and then you went forth to start this company, Certifid. Let's tell people about that experience that led you to the company that you are now the CEO of.
Yeah, thank you, Bill. So our path through this wire fraud experience is an interesting one. My business partner, Lawrence Stutler, and I are both attorneys. We founded a company in Michigan called Sun Title, still operating today as one of the largest in the state. And we end up having a wire fraud incident, and knock on wood, the only one to date. But that took place a few years ago, spring of 2015. And why that's significant is in 15, nobody was really talking about the issue. It was all new. And essentially what happened was we had been contacted by a buyer, and he was purchasing a property. He was out of state. He was purchasing a property. It was a gas station on the southeast side of Grand Rapids, Michigan. And we opened up a title order, and it felt like a normal commercial transaction. At one point, and all of this was kind of documented in this purchase agreement that we were following, we received a certified check for $185,000. And we had deposited that check, and then a few days later, the inspections were completed on the property, and we were asked to wire 180 of that 185 to an account that was allegedly held by the seller. So think of it as taking a check in, depositing that, making sure that check was good, and then wiring off that, kind of standard practice in the escrow industry. What the fraudsters knew that we did not at the time was how long it takes a check to fully clear the Federal Reserve. So a couple days after we had wired the funds, that quote-unquote certified check had bounced because it was a fraudulent check. So that's hard enough to get your head around in the sense that, hey, you just lost $180,000 overnight. What the next 2 years of our experience on wire fraud unfolded for us, we couldn't have imagined. So, and it really gets to the level of sophistication and patience that these cyber criminals are displaying in the lengths they'll go to defraud someone. And if you know anything about Grand Rapids, Michigan, it's a very conservative area. You'd think, hey, this is the last place in the world that, a cyber syndicate that's looking at doing some type of a fraud would even focus on. So it was kind of a blindsiding event for us as business owners and even operationally. So here's how it went. Our money left Grand Rapids and went to New York. What we didn't know is a German national had flown in at the instructions of someone else in the syndicate to go into a bank branch where the money had landed and launder the money. And frankly, they call it money muling. You probably heard that term from the FBI. So they had an international money mule involved in kind of leg one of the transfers. So the money lands from Grand Rapids to New York, and then it splinters down into 3 different wires into Texas. And why they do this, and they do it with incredible timing and accuracy, is they're trying to avoid recall or detection so that they can convert that cash to either cryptocurrency, or they can convert the wire into a down payment on some other property, credit cards being paid instantaneously. I mean, they move the money really quick. So in Texas, there were a cast of characters waiting there for the money to arrive, and they started doing a bunch of different things. They, again, put a down payment on a piece of property. They paid off a bunch of credit cards. They had prepaid with some kind of prepaid Visa cards. Some commodities were purchased off of our wire. So ultimately, we litigated, and we were able to, after 2 years of litigation, get a bulk of our funds back. What's interesting, though, is after we had kind of finished our civil recovery, getting as much money back, I got a call from the Department of Justice around some of the co-conspirators that were involved in our fraud. And this is where a lot of people, we can think, or we're creating awareness around wire fraud and the loss of financial funds. But there's also a much more personal and disruptive aspect to this, in the sense that if you're called by the Department of Justice to help in some type of investigation or trial, and I was. So what uncovered in an investigation was that our fraud actually involved one of the broadest cyber syndicates running out of Western Africa, called the Nigerian Black Axe, or the Neo-Nigerian movement. And we ended up getting wrapped up in a pretty significant trial that I had to testify last October with one of the main North American leaders of the syndicate. So you coined it best, Bill, when you said, prevention is really the best because you just don't want this to happen. So that's kind of our experience with, not only were we victims, we lost funds, we fought to get them back civilly, but then on the back end really called to bring those people and hold them accountable during, through a trial and with the Department of Justice. It was a fascinating and a lot of times terrifying aspect. And I say that because some of the co-conspirators had actually taken hits out on witnesses with other trials. So there was a whole another aspect of this group that went beyond financial and was much more kinetic in nature.
Guys that play rough, it sounds like. In fact, I remember when we had our FBI agent friend on the show talking about that, that's one of the things he said, just because it's maybe computers, technical thing, these criminal elements, gangs, coalitions, whatever you want to call them, they have their hands in many illegal things, and they play rough in many cases, probably most cases.
Yeah, I like to tell people they're not taking the money and improving the roads for us to go on vacation when we're overseas. They're just doing bad things, and there's just so much leaving the country. And now that we have a kind of an anonymous cryptocurrency base, even harder to detect when U.S. funds are transferred to crypto and then ultimately to some other fiat currency. So, no, I'll echo what you're saying. We learned that firsthand. These guys definitely play rough. It's a $9 billion industry for them right now. I heard I was speaking with the FBI earlier this year, and he said, hey, if you created a $9 billion company, you'd make investments in it, you'd refine your strategy, you'd build the infrastructure. He says it's no different. They're doing the exact same thing.
It's a good business for them. There's no doubt.
Yeah.
Tom, before we get into what you all are specifically doing for the industry, talk a little bit about, based on your experience, a big part of our listeners are home buyers, property owners, and real estate agents. And any thoughts on what they could be doing as part of a transaction to mitigate their own risk?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing and the best line of defense is really understanding the process of how real estate transactions are funded. Sitting down with your agent, having your agent, more importantly, sit down with the title provider. Typically, the agent or the lender selects the title provider in a transaction. It's not just a Texas thing. This is everywhere in the U.S.
Right.
If you're in the middle of a transaction or you're nearing close and nobody has mentioned anything about wire fraud or how I get my cash to close to you in a secure way, many states require those to be wired because wire transfers are the safest way to transmit money. They're much safer than checks because they're instantaneous. But they're also single point of failure, meaning if the endpoint somehow is diverted by a fraudster, there's no calling that back in most cases. So I think the first thing is if anybody is thinking about, has started, or nearing the end of the process, you've got to raise your hand with your attorney, with your real estate agent, title and settlement provider, and have a conversation about what to expect. And frankly, what are some of those flags that if they come up, you can spot them as malicious or potentially fraudulent versus those that can be trusted. If somebody is sending you, just to give you some examples, if somebody is sending you wiring information through an email, that's a huge problem. Or if you received wiring information because you stopped in an office and you signed for them or whatever the process was and you feel like you got it from a credentialed source, and then somebody calls you and says, hey, it's been updated, or we changed banks, or there's some other reason why you may need to wire to a different account, those are the types of things that you just really have to be suspect of, because to what Tom was saying earlier, they're creating pitch-perfect messages that have transaction-level information embedded in them. So you'll think it's coming in thinking, oh, this has to be my attorney, this has to be the title company, because who would know this? We were just talking about this. They know it because they're reading somebody's email in real time. And then they're impersonating them to get you as someone in the transaction to divert funds. So those are the types of things that you just have to get educated and get basically the cadence or the, what are the rules of the road here around wires before I'm asked to send funds.
Well, what comes to mind, in fact, I'm thinking about my son and his wife are in the process of buying a new home. And as I'm talking to him about getting ready, we're like 15 days before they close. I mean, the buyers and sellers, they have a lot on their mind already, and it probably works to the fraudsters' advantage in that they're thinking about changing their electricity over. They're thinking about, how am I going to move this? What am I going to do with all this stuff? What's the timing going to be? They have the inspection work out, where the repairs are made, all those many, many things, and they're distracted. They're just going through the process. They expect, like I did when I bought my home years ago, they expect everything to be secure, to not even worry about this right now.
No, I agree. I think the challenge with real estate that's different from other transactions is there's no muscle memory, because we're in the market so infrequently, the average consumer. So you may have closed on your house, whatever it was, right? On average, we're hovering around 10 years, up from 7 years before the Great Recession. And so much changes in the industry in 12 months. Now, we as industry participants, we say, oh, yeah, that was a 2-year ago thing or 3-year ago thing. But somebody hasn't been in the market for the last whatever many years, and they are completely reliant in a lot of cases on their advisors to safely guide them through the closing process. Now, you may know how to find property values and look up. That's different. I'm talking about the blocking and tackling of getting a real estate transaction closed and insured properly. And that's exactly right. What we're seeing, and this was an alarming trend that we started to see in April of this year, is that the fraudsters aren't waiting until the week of closing to reach out and try to solicit wires from buyers. They're reaching out week one. We helped a gentleman in New York with a full recovery in August. He hadn't even signed the purchase agreement yet and wired $114,000 to a fraudster thinking he was communicating with his lawyer that got hacked.
Wow.
That's the challenge, is the timing of this. So if your real estate agent, or more importantly, I would say your title and settlement provider, aren't ahead of this thing, and you're a first-time home buyer and you've never wired funds in your life, you certainly haven't bought a home, and the first time you're learning about anything related to a wire transfer is coming from the fraudster, really hard to defend against that right now. I'll echo what Tom was saying. That's my biggest concern as well, is you're going through due diligence. They're, asking for everything short of a blood sample for the loan. I mean, we're doing all this stuff, and in that they thread in, oh, by the way, to make sure we don't lose this house, you need to wire your however much, your $50,000, $80,000, $100,000 to this account so we can season that before closing.
We are talking with Tom Cronkright, the CEO of Certifid, also Tom Carpentier, president of Stewart Insurance. And we're going to take a short break. When we come back, we're going to talk about some of the potential things, the things that we can do to prevent this, and some other ideas on cybercrime. Stay with us, please.